Falconer Award, the highest rated junior under 18.
Guys, guys.
Lecture starting, everyone.
2170. We have also the Pro Chess League going on tonight, the worldwide chess league played over the internet. One of our team members is our own John Donaldson, who was going to play tonight but ended up shifting the schedule. But two of the players are playing in the boardroom. We ask that you don't go in the boardroom to watch, and we'll be able to show the games right here on our wonderful new screen. There is the live commentary done by, it's going to be David Bruce and Andy Lee in room 407, broadcast around the world, but you can see it live right here, and you're welcome to go in the skills room as usual to look at your games. What happened very recently, just lots of chess here in the Bay Area, was the Bay Area International, a strong Grandmaster tournament with 2,700 players, all our best junior players, players from the old days, very young players, and the winners of that tournament were first on tiebreak, Grandmaster Lê Quang Liam from Vietnam, and also Andre Stukopin. What happened to Lê Quang Liam was something that you might get some inspiration from. There he was, he finished first in the tournament, 7 points out of 9, great result. But what he did early on was he lost to 11-year-old Christopher Yu. So, anyway, the 2,700 Grandmaster losing to a young fellow like that, I think most all of us can relate to that. And some of you, I know, get terrified when you see some young, bright player who's gaining rating points very quickly. Well, I think that person's probably been playing chess for 7 years, studying their openings very energetically. So don't worry if you're playing a young player. If they're good, and they'll have a good day or a bad day. So if that happens to you, you can win or lose the game, but just go on and win the tournament afterwards. We're going to see a couple games from that Bay Area International. There's a player that you might be familiar with, Alejandro Ramirez, the first Grandmaster from Costa Rica. Very nice fellow, but he's now part of the US contingent more than Costa Rica. He's often in St. Louis. You'll see him doing commentary. I run into him sometimes at chess camps. He was half a point behind, 6.5 points out of 9. And his last round game was against a promising IM, Praveen Balakrishnan. It's an opening that probably people can relate to. Balakrishnan had the white pieces, just your classical double king pawn game. And Balakrishnan plays the Ruy Lopez, which used to be the main opening for all grandmasters or serious players, and now people have gone back to the old Italian way of 500 years ago. You see more than half the games the Gioco piano. But today's game was the classical Ruy Lopez, and Ramirez responds with one of the problems, the modern problems of this opening, which is the Berlin defense, which Vladimir Kramnik used to beat Kasparov in the World Championship match. That always goes castles, grab that hanging e-pawn, which leads to all this center action, but then you jump back, kick the bishop, and after he gets the pawn back, you get an end game where white has a little better pawns, but black has the two bishops, and Kasparov couldn't win that, and other people have had a lot of problems. So when Ramirez played the Berlin defense, Krishnan decided, okay, none of these dry end games, let's just defend the pawn, kind of a classical move. But it's a little bit of a drawback that you used to go pawn to c3, pawn to d4 in one move. It was a little more aggressive. And here black's got very good chances to equalize. Ramirez just defends the e-pawn. Development castles, and black could just develop, but he first now puts the question to the bishop. You could retreat the classical Ruy Lopez. He chooses to give up the bishop pair and double the pawns. Okay, reasonable, sort of a matter of taste, what you want to do. I personally always like two bishops. They can spring to life so suddenly. Now, Balakrishnan develops, and a nice move from Ramirez. You want to develop your pieces, but if you're thinking ahead to your plan, you want to put them in a place where you get a very active game. So he develops this bishop, but over on this square, kind of like a King's Indian defense. And you'll see that that gives him options on the king side, taking more control of the squares. Now, a bit of an aggressive move. One would move a rook, move a knight. But Balakrishnan puts the pawn to b4, and the idea is you're kind of restraining these pawns. And maybe you can develop, but now the pawn to c5 would just lead to double pawns, so black is a little restrained on the queen side. On the other hand, you expose the pawn a bit, some pluses and minuses. Develop, and castles. Now, well, what's the plan for white? You could come in the center, look towards the king side, but his plan has been to play against these double pawns. So knight attacks that. Again, you don't want to push it. But you'll notice this knight is far out here in left field. We'll remember this later in the game. Ramirez guards the pawn. Maybe could have done with the bishop, but all right, he's got plans for the queen. Rook to e1 and knight h5. Those familiar with the King's Indian see well, black's plan is just to advance on the king side. The game is roughly equal at this point. No one's ahead of material, little pluses and minuses, the two bishops, but worse pawn structure. But now comes a questionable move, bishop b2. You want to develop all your pieces, but you can see it's headed right here on this e5 pawn, and you might be getting the feeling that you're neglecting the king side a little bit. Yes. You mean here, Guy?
Yes.
You play exactly like Stockfish. Rated 3,000. And Stockfish... So, thank you, Guy. But Balakrishnan, he thought it looked nice to put it on the long diagonal. And now comes the advance pawn to f5. I would already be getting kind of nervous here with the white side. My method for attacking is very complicated. I simply count the pieces. How many pieces are moving over to the king side against how many pieces are defending. And I see this one, this one, this one over here, where this bishop, probably these ones, are moving closer to the king. Knight d2 is a good defensive move. But knight f4, that's a very nice, very aggressive spot for a knight. And once you have a knight this close to the king, things can happen. Maybe the queen will come up.
So,
yes.
At this point, is white relegated to merely defending, or does it have some plan like playing d4 or c4? I mean, what is white doing here? It seems to be making some random moves.
That's an excellent question. That's, in fact, very key here. I think you're right. This move was a pretty good defensive move. This move was a little random. And white is in a bit of trouble here. So you have to decide what to do. And one idea is, well, let's try to break it open, get our pieces active. And the other is, well, hunker down, defend. The best players in the world, Karyakin, Carlsen, Caruana, they're really good at defending when they get a bad position. And here you should anticipate black coming on the king side and try to take some squares there that you control for the defense. So now, yeah, I might have just played pawn to f3, get a little more strength around here. But Balakrishnan, he was thinking like you do, what is the plan? And he goes straight for activity, breaking in the center, trying to get the bishop open. But this also opens the black bishop. And we'll see the sequence that happens. This is the move that gets you into big trouble. You were in trouble before, but now, what do you do exactly? Pawn takes e4, so opening up two of the long-range black pieces. And Balakrishnan recaptures the pawn. Pawn to d5. Black is advancing. And this is simply trouble no matter how you count it. Really hard to suggest a good move for white here. The computer likes this knight to c5, but it's still a bad position. It's great positionally, but you've got everybody over on the queen side here, with the king side attack coming. So it's very natural that he would play this knight to g3, what he chose, because it's another defender on the king side. And now we'll let you take over. How are we going to crash through with this attack? What's our plan?
R takes c5.
Pardon?
Rook takes c5.
White has just moved the knight back to g3, so it's black's move.
d4. e4?
e4 is positionally very sensible. That should probably be the first move that you would think about. It keeps this bishop blocked, more control over here, and that's an excellent move, but not the best.
So black can play a move to try to win 2 pawns for a piece on the king side. Bishop h3, and gh3, knight h3 check, and then f2 falls. Otherwise, g2 is attacked twice.
Okay, very good. That's the move played in the game. sometimes you decide, should I cash in? I know I have a positional advantage, I know my pieces are active, but is this going to work? 2 pieces for a, sorry, 2 pawns for a piece and an attack. And again, the attack is much more likely to work with these white pieces over to the side.
Actually, I'm not even sure you can, I'm not even sure you can even, I guess you can take it and step up maybe, but you can't play king f1 or king h1 and don't lose.
You're right, as soon as you look at it, oh, if I take it, the knight check, you know, the king in the corner is a fork, there's bad things happening, and you think, maybe I shouldn't take it. There is a big problem if you don't take it either, such as, well, say you would take in the center, but once you lose this g-pawn, then all the white squares around your king are very weak. There's kind of sequence here, like queen up, you're attacking all these weak squares. Knight f4. It's kind of a rout. You may not even take the exchange, but all the black pieces come in and you haven't lost any material at all. So Balakrishnan had a very difficult choice and decides, well, if you're going to be attacked, let's at least have some material. So he took the bishop. And as Steve said, check 1 pawn. Where can the king go? King h1 is the knight fork. King f1 is even worse because of checkmate with the rook. So only choice is king to g2. And you're all doing very well with the attack, so I'll let you continue. What is black's continuation here?
Rook takes edge, f1, f2.
Rook takes, you see your knight is hanging.
Well, but then the queen can come down to e5, e6, sorry.
Yes, I was just trying to talk you out of it, but you're a brave man. And exactly the right move. Just pow, check on that king. You're not worried about that knight. One simple thing would be, as you say, queen checks. King there is going to be mate. Queen g4, you would at least win the queen. So that would be over.
So what about, could you play king h1 instead of taking the...
Instead of this, yes, let's try anything. And in fact, he did play king to h1 after the rook takes f2 check. King h1 and the knight can't do the fork on f2 because the rook is there. No.
So,
check with the rook, and then you do the fork.
Well,
there's no fork.
if we check, the rook will take it and guard the forking square.
Yeah,
you need
But this position, it just, you know it feels terrible for the white side, all these pieces around. So, anyone want to suggest a move for black?
I think we have to take the pawn.
Sorry, which pawn?
the queen will fall.
Well, then the king will take it, and it's not going to be a fork.
Okay, yeah, because it's the knight goes to the castle. So you have to lose the knight.
You need
Okay, don't you just bring the knight back?
Bring the knight to g5, or? It's a thought. I'll always try to trade off those dangerous attacking pieces.
So maybe,
Back to the f square.
Queen f8 or no?
well, yeah, just bring some more pieces over to the king side.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Maybe queen of spade or maybe another queen move.
Yes.
Bring the rook.
Queen,
Why not seven?
And-
Seven.
And in fact, yes, queen e6, getting closer to these white squares. And why you don't want f8 is because you've got somebody else that can join the attack. Balakrishnan tried to defend rook e2, get rid of one of the attacking pieces, and good. This one should be easy. Yeah, this one's doing nothing. Just bring it over. One more piece in the attack. Look again at the white pieces. This one's not helping, not helping, not helping. You're technically down a piece, but it sure doesn't feel like it. So this game is, of course, getting desperate for the white side. But what you do is you take your best chance, and sometimes it's very hard to finish an opponent off. Usually there's a tactical sequence that needs to be played, and sometimes your opponent doesn't see it through, messes up one move, and you end up winning the game. So after rook to f8, well, what do you do? You did queen d3. So this one can try to help, the queen can try to help. Another move for the black side, please.
Queen g5.
Well,
Queen g5.
Yes, you could try knight to f4, forking, and then I might say, you know what, let me try to bail out. If I can get a rook, you take, I'll do a check and get rid of this. Maybe I've gotten rid of some of your attacking force. So I did hear the suggestion.
Look at three.
rook f1 check, rook takes rook, rook
Well,
takes.
I have a knight.
Okay, and then the queen comes down to g4, threatening late rounded. No?
Okay, this rook check here, there's that one and that one. You're going to lose both your rooks. But as you suggested,
What about rook h3?
8 to f3. Okay, that's, yeah, a very dangerous attacking move. Looks really good. I'd probably have to play rook e3. Don't like my game, but
Does that lose the queen for
Well,
some material?
If we can get the knight to f2, it's still a fork on the queen and a check on the king.
yes, you're trying to get that. I think I may have all those covered that you don't quite get a fork here. I would get a lucky swindle.
When
Yep.
rook
Rook
takes
takes,
rook,
queen
knight
takes.
takes, and then, oh no, queen takes. Yep.
You've got me here. I'm just really a goner, but
What,
yeah, you have to.
why didn't you do queen to d2? Get back up and moves back. instead of d3.
Well, right here it's this position.
Yeah.
Rook here, queen d2. Yeah, it's bad, but I'm
Then you
maybe
could've-
hanging on. He played a much stronger move for black, and someone had suggested it. You've got all these attacking pieces. Get this one a bit closer, and you've got a lot of ideas of checkmate. The two rooks, the queen, the knight. You can't play rook takes rook because the knight will take it forking. And we've got a threat. We've got a threat of rook checks. So here there's really no way out. There's there's rook checks, rook takes, knight takes, the queen would come down mate, so he tries his best chance, which is to bring one more defender in, rook to G1, hoping that the knight would take that rook and, just, okay, for an exchange, you're still alive. But there's a sort of sequence to finish this. Anybody feeling tactical today?
Can we still do rook F1?
Rook F1, that was our idea, rook F1. Probably
Changing
pretty.
the queens, no?
What was that?
The rook was on F2. That looks pretty good too.
Knight takes.
Knight
Then
takes,
queen
would
takes,
take
check
mate.
So the rook has to take. So
Rook take, probably
or
king
rook
G2,
to
No.
rook G2,
and then rook G1 check.
rook E2 to G1.
That meeting?
Rook E2 to G2. Yes, I could go rook takes, and knight forks.
Okay, yeah,
That wins the queen. That's probably more than enough. He did find a very easy sequence, just rook takes on E2. And if knight takes,
Well, the
Then
knight is 10, the knights though, 10 is, yeah, that knight counts.
Yeah,
rook
then-
was
Oh, wait.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wait, now.
then it would be knight to F2 checkmate. Not just a fork, but checkmate. So he had to recapture with the queen. And now, even if you're a little tired, you can find the winning sequence.
I
Anybody?
said rook F2.
Rook F2, that won't work. I'll take your queen.
Oh, yeah.
Queen takes queen.
queen takes queen,
Queen takes queen,
Knight
knight takes
takes.
queen.
and
Oh.
then,
Let's go for mate.
and then, no, but knight will stop the rook from coming down.
Knight check. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Winslow. We will simply
I wanna move this more.
knight checks. Yes. Okay, queen takes, you do rook takes, and the only other move,
Just to come up.
and this I would give to our elementary school class. That checkmate in one move.
Winner.
Queen H3.
Yes, queen H3 is checkmate. So it was a nice win for Ramirez. He finished tied for third place. And nice to win with black in the final round. We see we don't quite have our Pro Chess screen up yet, but hopefully we'll have that a little later. In that case, I'm going to show you a game from one of our grandmasters of yesteryear, kind of like the Lone Ranger. His name is James Tarzan. And I don't know how many of you knew him when he used to be a professional chess player 30 years ago. And he then worked as a research librarian and then came back to chess about 3-4 years ago. He beat Vladimir Kramnik in a tournament in the Isle of Man, made the news around the world. He has his ups and downs, and he played in the Bay Area International here, did all right, had an unfortunate last round loss, but it was a very nice game. And since he always writes these blogs about his chess travels and experiences, anyone who gets to read them, I think you'll find them very entertaining. But because he does that, I'll show his last round
Where
game.
would you find those logs?
We do get them, they come to the chessclub.com website, so I think Paul can show them to you if you're here in the club someday. Another young fellow Aaron Jakobsen, who's 20 years old. As Tarzan wrote, this was the second oldest player he played in this event. So a lot of promising young players in the Bay Area. And Jakobsen plays very classic chess, the way Fischer and Smyslov and Tal used to play. We get a classic Rui Lopez. And Tarzan also plays old school. He plays classic lines where you develop the pieces, kick the bishop, defend the pawn, push the bishop back. And white plays pawn to c3. If you'll notice the difference of this game compared to the last one, the pawn is still on d2, so it's able to jump to d4 in one jump. Gives you a little extra initiative. Black castles, and before advancing with d4, you play pawn to h3 to stop the bishop from coming to g4. It's also a useful move a lot of times defending the king or making move. So this is old theory, been around for 50, 60 years. Yes, Guy?
It also stops the knight from going there too.
In case you want to jump with the knight, which you might sometime, yes. So there's a lot of modern variations, bishop to b7, such. Tarzan chooses the old classical Breyer variation where the knight retreats, and after d4 it relocates to d7. It's a good opening, but to me it was always a little bit passive with the black side. White continues the plan. First, develop this knight. Bishop to b7, and this knight maneuver, which happens a lot in the Italian game or the Spanish. Oh, I'm sorry. I was hanging the pawn, wasn't I? Thank you for catching that. Yes, bishop c2. Rook to e8 and knight to f1. Bishop comes to f8 with 1, 2, 3, ready to hit the pawn after the exchange on d4. But the knight comes to g3 in time, so you've got 3 pieces holding that key e4 square. And white has a little more space and a little bit of an initiative. Black's got everything developed, but just slightly worse. Pawn to g6, hold some of the kingside squares, can pinch out of the bishop. Pawn a4, pawn to c5, and this is still very much in the mainline theory. The d4 pawn is under pressure, so pawn to d5 takes some space, makes it a closed game, again a little like a King's Indian defense. So there's going to be maneuvering on the sides with a locked center. It's not clear who has the advantage on the king side or the queen side, so you have to play on both sides of the board. Pawn to c4, bishop to g5, and Tarzan had prepared this opening before. He quotes some book he had read. He plays knight to c5. I think he should probably play pawn to h6 to take a little more space on this king side. I played this position against Belyatsky and some of the older Russian players a lot, and they would play this move. The bishop has to retreat, and you don't have quite as an easy time on the king side. Tarzan playing knight to c5, following the book he had read, and queen to d2. Stops pawn to h6. Okay, everybody's developed, and what is your plan? There's always this option of taking the pawn on a4, the bishop will take, but then these pawns get split. Tarzan breaks the pin. I should maybe threatening to go knight takes d. No, that's guarded enough. Anyway, Jakobsen plays bishop h6, covering some of these somewhat loose squares over here. Knight d7. And is there anyone here who plays the Ruy Lopez with the white side? Two, not so many.
Oh, yeah, but I play bishop g5, where you mentioned it, like Spassky four-ish.
You play bishop g.
I play bishop g5, h6, bishop back to d3, before the knight, you know.
Ah, you play the brayer itself.
Both sides, but,
Both sides, okay. Well, here we have a classic situation. Develop, what do you do? And you have to make a plan. And Jakobsen plays the classic plan.
you wanna go. No, you.
Knight h2 because you need a pawn break on this side of the board. So the break is going to be pawn to f4, which will open a file, gain some space. And it's slow going, but once the attack comes, it can be really ferocious. So after knight h2, Tarzan decides to react and plays knight takes a4. Bishop takes a4, pawn takes, and rook takes a4.
Okay, so I have a question. So sometimes black chooses to give up his pawn by playing the knight to d3 instead of doing this. He took on a4.
Well, that would be a pawn sacrifice.
Right.
Okay, then with a locked position, you want to make sure that you have compensation for a pawn, because it's locked, you can maneuver slowly, and usually the extra pawn will count for a lot.
But this looks like he's giving up a lot positionally on the C pawn, the A pawn, but both are weak.
Well, I think you're right, but as these things turn out in modern chess, often it comes down to these tactics. And he's given this up, but now he advances and he wants to grab some squares over here. This is the logic. In fact, Tarzan is still in his pre-game preparation from the book. The knight comes up to g4.
And so, what was rook c4 meant by a4 or
Knight
knight
e6.
Knight e6.
Yes,
Knight
it's,
e6.
right. There's no square for the rook to retreat to.
All right.
Very good. But now, before moving the knight to c5, he first defends the pawn with bishop a6, pawn to f4, and now knight to c5. Oh, he's looking to get the knight to d3. He's looking for activity with the black side. And here, Jakobsen plays a very nice move. There was some suggestion in the book where white retreats the rook to a2 so that it doesn't get forked. Very logical, but with the knight on b3, it can't go anywhere. And Jakobsen retreats to a1 where it can come back and join the attack.
And there's no fork?
Excellent question, because that's what happened. He forked the queen and rook. And here's where the game gets exciting. You, of course, want to move the queen, and he moved the queen to f2. And if you don't take the rook, you've done this whole plan, which really hasn't got you that much, and white's going to attack on the queen side, king side, so Tarzan takes the rook. But similar to last game, we can get a sense of the attack. Simply you count the pieces. two knights, bishop, pawn, queen. It's quite a lot. The defenders are just here. But this attack, well, not sure it's going to go through at first sight. Anyone want to guess the move here that white played?
Pawn takes pawn.
Okay, pawn takes pawn, opening up, you could. Kind of a sensible move.
You can also push.
You could push.
Rook to F1.
Okay, rook to F1 gives you the option of taking or pushing. So that one's really dangerous. Now you're threatening to take and invade. He just leaves the knight here in the corner, saying, well, all right, these pieces are over there. If I win with the attack, then these pieces won't matter. But you have to defend. Tarzan played pawn to F6. Okay, you don't really want to take, win a pawn, trade the queens, and you're going to be a rook down. So that's not going to be enough. Jan Jakobsen, he played pawn to F5. And this is quite impressive because you look and you say, well, it looks like a strong attack, but does it actually work?
Doesn't G5 locks up the whole game?
Excellent question, and you played exactly like Tarzan.
No, he looks like he could. Yeah.
He's gonna try to sack the bishop.
Oh, yes. Sacking the bishop.
Well, if you had retreated the knight,
Oh.
then you would take sort of opening things up and jump in. Again, you don't care about losing that knight if the queen would invade, and that would be a quick checkmate with a queen, bishop, and knight. And meanwhile, you're going to take check. The computer checked this out. It's a winning position for the white side.
What about rook F8? Not here, before that.
Okay, we're going to get to all those moves. Tarzan played pawn to G5, leaving the knight here. He's saying, I'm not going to try to save this knight. I need to save my king. So he tries to lock up the position. Who said sack the bishop?
I did.
Okay.
Well, actually, I said it first. But I wasn't sure if it was gonna work.
Okay, I love the spirit, but first he got another attacking piece closer and closer to the king. And now what do? This bishop can't get back to the defense. It just can't get back there. The rook's having a hard time. Tarzan saved his knight, thinking, okay, maybe he can give up something over here and have material enough to draw. So you're sacking the bishop. I kind of like that, but you can get another attacking piece into the game for white.
Well, I do have a question.
H4. There we go. That little pawn can take just as well as the bishop. One more attacker. And if we count the attackers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe this one.
So one defensive idea for black would be to play king f7 and rook g8 if he can get his king out of that area of the board.
Okay, king f7 now.
Maybe I was thinking of it maybe before knight b3, but it depends on how desperate he is.
That's true. At some point you could take the knight, even on this pawn, for an exchange. You'd have a terrific attack. So there are a lot of ideas. We're running a bit short of time, so I won't think of them all. And I believe you suggested another defense for black, which Tarzan chose. You have to get another defender over there. You can try to run with the king, but I don't think it's going to go far.
Bishop takes well by knight check.
Okay. He played rook to f8. Just too many on here. Just get a defender. You're up a whole rook. you don't mind giving back an exchange if you'll survive. And there are various moves that can win the game. One is bishop g7, threatening knight checkmate, so you'd have to give up the pawn. But he first took the rook. The queen took the rook, and pawn takes g5. So you're now down one exchange. Sorry, you're down one piece. You've got temporarily a pawn. You're about to crash through there, so he took back on g5, and this next move should be easy for everybody. Yes. Push him, baby, as Yasser Serouan says.
Double round.
Okay, you have to save your bishop at this point. And pawn to f7 check. One square for the king. We're getting close to the end. Anybody with an idea for white? I should give you a lot of time for this move.
Try to break the blockade with maybe knight f6, d7. That's what I do.
That's a thought. They had lots of time, not like us running out of time. He sacrificed on e5, also trying to break the blockade. And after pawn takes, the question is, how do you guard your black squares? You can't move the queen, because then white queen's checkmating. If you move your bishop to c7, queen f6 check is mate in 2.
Yeah.
So the only thing to prolong the game was make an escape square. And check. Check. And they actually repeated the position. Then knight check. Bishop takes. And a little finesse here. You don't take right away, first to check. So, check, king h7. And you don't quite have a checkmate, but what you do have is 3 connected passed pawns. And
Why not king to f2 and then rook to h1?
well, one, the queen will be guarding that.
But then you have the pawn. Oh, there's a rook. Okay.
This is very nice that the black pieces can't stop the pawns very well. Rook there, you had to stop pawn to e7. And some more checks, maneuver. Rook f6, so now queen check and rook will be decisive. This bishop, which has been a spectator the whole game, tries to come back to help. Really no defense here. And anyone with the last move of the game for white?
Yes. Just sacrifice maybe, like rook h6.
Rook h6 check, because that's when the queen takes it, you make a queen with check and win everything. So a sad game for Tarzan, but I thought it was a very nice game from young Jakobsen. We are at 6:15, 15 minutes before. I think, do we have the protest games up now on the screen?
Oh, you got it. The Pro League. It's actually frozen. They're working on that.
Okay, well,
That is it, but figuring out why it's frozen.
Well,
When
anyway,
you get it going, we'll put the volume up to, as soon as you're done.
I am done here, and,
Hey,